Orcs of Orakion, Episode 3. It had been a few days since Thytok fell on the battlefield. Despite the best efforts of Orakion's healers and shamans, she remained unconscious in her recovery. The leadership of the tribes was assumed by two orcs of great standing and heroism, well respected by every soul that crossed the Kir Peaks with them. Silmat, the former Royal Army general, commanded teams of fighters, scouts, and defenders, while Iark Menor, the experienced veteran, led construction and farming efforts. No one dared say it, but willingly or not, they challenged each other's authority, and the encampment was quickly divided into supporters of Silmat's leadership, which was more aggressive and belligerent against the Shadows, and those of Iark, who preferred defensive strategies and preached a peace that had to be brokered with them somehow, since they are the natural inhabitants of Seamstone. Despite the rivalry, things seemed to be going relatively well for the orcs. Silmat's carefully planned raids managed to destroy several shadow enclaves, and Iark's experience in rebuilding towns after war helped improve the quality of buildings and the general resilience of the encampment. One camp, two leaders. Iark bursted into Silmat's tent, where the general was having a meeting with Slisataikir and Gafar, his two trusted advisors. "What the hell were you thinking, Silmat? I told you no more raids!" A brief silence followed, as the general and his lieutenants looked at each other with a stern look on their faces. Iark advanced through the tent, approaching Slissa with an abrupt movement as he threw his arms in the air, raging. "You were there, Slissa. You saw that spectre. What we had to do to beat it. Is that who you want to make enemies with? We got to leave them alone, don't you see?" Rising from his chair, Gafar put his hands on Iark's chest and cut off the line of sight between him and Slissa. "Easy there, old man. Maybe you think you fought your last battle, but we haven't drawn our blades for the last time yet." Slissa got up and, moving next to Gafar, added, "Besides, who said you were calling the shots, Iark?" The veteran looked at Gafar and Slissa in disbelief, taking a few steps back towards the tent's entrance. "Unbelievable. You're gonna get us all killed." Before leaving, Iark turned back and asked one final question. "Do these kids speak for you, Silmat?" The general only looked at him in silence and nodded. Iark gazed back at Silmat, in his battle-torn uniform, with more scars and bruises than he could possibly count. "I've been down that path, Silmat. It doesn't end well." For the first time, Silmat replied, "I've been down that path too. It's brutal, but it's how we survive, Iark. Maybe you just don't have the will to fight any longer. Our shadow-clearing initiative is the only reason we can gather and hunt food in peace. Do you forget that?" Iark shook his head and loudly stormed out of the tent. Outside, Ryuk Nakat was waiting for him, nervously filling his fingers. The spirit bird he rescued all that time ago on his shoulder, cooing softly as its feathers glistened beautifully. "They're not interested in making amends, Ryuk." "Are you sure? Did you tell them that?" "Yes, Ryuk, I told them everything. Some orcs are so focused on muscle, they forget they also have to use their brains." Ryuk looked at Iark with a disappointed expression. He looked sadly towards the tent, where whispers and planning could still be heard through the fabric. "This is all wrong." Ryuk gave Iark a quick salute and briskly walked to the outskirts of the encampment. He looked at Seamstone's strange landscape, like a castaway stranded on an isle, gazing towards a horizon of blue waves. Suddenly, the spirit bird became agitated, shaking its feathers around before taking to the air and hovering a few feet above Ryuk's head for a few seconds. It gazed into the distance, as if something was calling it. "See something nice in the distance?" The bird wailed an eerie melody, and suddenly accelerated away in the direction of a nearby valley. Taken by surprise, Ryuk could only watch for a few moments as his magical pet flew into the distance. Shaking his head and snapping back to reality, Ryuk began to run into the wilderness in pursuit of the spirit bird. From the entrance of the orcish encampment, Tricolor, The warrior he had rescued in his first scouting mission shouted, "Where the hell do you think you're going, Ryuk? You have construction duty today. I've already covered your last 2 shifts." Turning around as he ran into the wilderness, Ryuk shouted back, "I'll be back for work. Just keep Yark off my back for a couple hours." Tricolor sighed and rolled his eyes back, but accepted the sorcerer's answer, knowing there was nothing he could do to change it. Ryuk quickly disappeared behind the nearby trees as he ran, desperately trying to keep up with the spirit bird's flight. Using magic to boost his jumps, he easily got over steep climbs and small cliffs, but it still wasn't enough to catch up to the gleaming bird, whose shining feathers grew dimmer and dimmer in the distance. Eventually, the sorcerer completely lost sight of the spirit bird and decided to walk in the general direction where it had flown off to. He walked for a few hours and began recognizing his surroundings. He had been here a week ago with Yark and Slissa. He had wandered very close to the Spectre's cave. Ryuk's mind flooded with memories of that heroic battle, of Yark's terrible wound, and of all that had happened when the Resilience Party first set out to explore Seamstone. Maybe the bird remembers too, reflected Ryuk out loud. The vegetation and wildlife in this region seemed a lot healthier than before, rejuvenated, blossoming. The sorcerer sat on the ground for a moment, taking in the fresh air of Seamstone. With his back against a huge tree and his eyes closed, Ryuk began whistling an old song of Orakion, a tune as old as Orcish civilization itself. He felt relaxed, swayed by the nature around him, to keep whistling the notes. A druidic magic was tiding over him, asking to share his presence. Moved by the overwhelming peace and tranquility of the forest around him, Ryuk gifted Orakion's song to the shrouded druidic presence of the region. The melody looped and hovered around the sorcerer, as an inner sense of restfulness washed over him. For the first time since he reached Seamstone, Ryuk felt in tune with the flow of magic, with the flow of the world in its endless revolutions. The melody eventually came to an end, but the peace remained, and he fell into a deep, magical slumber. Countless dreams appeared in Ryuk's mind, flooding his soul with vitality, love, determination, and a strange sort of harmony, the kind one feels when affairs are in order, and only rest seems to await in the horizon. He woke up feeling refreshed and healthy, though not knowing how much time had passed. A couple hours? Days? Weeks? Whatever it may be, the sorcerer slowly but steadily rose up from the ground as he regained control over his comfortably numb body muscles. Suddenly speaking a few words, a previously unseen mystical figure came to interrupt his tranquility. How very interesting. And here I thought all orcs were brutes. A very tall creature loomed over the sorcerer, almost 5 heads higher than him. It had twisting brown antlers, fur-covered hoofs, elf-like elongated ears, and a human-like torso. Its face was scrunched up in enigmatic reflection, betraying the look of a being that had seen more winters than most orcs can count to. Root-like formations and vines acted as a natural clothing of sorts to this strange being. Startled by the creature's sudden appearance, Ryuk tripped over a tree's roots and fell backwards, straight into the spot he was using as a resting place moments ago. You? I've seen illustrations. Are you a satyr? I'm honored to meet such an incredible a satyr? You should get your eyes checked, Orkling. These aren't horns on my head, they're antlers. Oh, right. You still don't know what I am, do you? Well, no matter. I do like a good mystery, said the strange being with a mischievous grin. Anyway, a little bird has been telling me a lot about you. The spirit bird climbed from the creature's back onto its shoulders, spreading its wings reassuringly in the process. Ha! Only good things, I imagine, replied Ryuk with a sarcastic tone as he recovered his posture after the fall. The being meditated on the question for a moment before answering. Surprisingly, yes. It seems like you are capable of giving back to the land, unlike the others you, crashed in here with. The bird glided seamlessly from the creature's shoulders to Ryuk's lap, where it curled up and cooed softly. You look like you have questions, Orkling, continued the mysterious being. Yes. You said you're not a satyr. What are you, then? The antler-bearing creature grinned slightly, almost amused by the sorcerer's confusion. You may call me Dexion, young one. I have lived 12 of your lifetimes. Sitting more upwardly, Ryuk continued his inquiry. I see. And what race are you? Orkling, hear me now and hear me good. I am not the one you should be asking questions about. Not now, anyway. Are you not more interested in the roots of your race's struggles here? Yeah, you're right. It's just that... Good. Your people are acting like parasites on this immaculate land. You are distressing, scaring, and massacring the wildlife. You take and fail to give back. And worst of all, you have attracted the dark touch of the Fions onto this land. The Fions? Do you mean the shadows? Dexion looked down on Ryuk with a slightly apologetic expression, like a father realizing he's explaining things to his young son that he couldn't possibly understand. Raising his hand and nodding slightly, it continued. Yes, Ryuk of Orakion. They are known as Fions and are a terrible force, but they are only drawn to places that fall out of harmony and balance. This is exactly what you and your fellow Orklings did within this place, the one you call Seamstone. A puzzled Ryuk looked back at the wondrous creature, accusing his kin of destroying the natural balance of the region. But we're just trying to survive, Dexion. Surely you can understand that, being an entity as attuned to nature as yourself. Don't confuse the wretched perversions of the world center with what goes on here, Orkling. Beyond the seal, harmony rules nature, not senseless competition. Magic is strong enough to feed everyone's needs without harming others. Beyond the seal, Dexion sighed. Everything needs to be explained to you, Can you not feel the energy around you? I thought you were well versed in the workings of the arcane, but perhaps I was wrong. No, please. I want to know more. Yet you are the only one that gave back to the land through real action. Athon there. He lives thanks to that, continued Dexion, ignoring Ryuk's plea as he pointed towards the spirit bird, his gaze lost in the horizon. Shaking his head to regain concentration, he looked back at the sorcerer. You had better convince the ones called Silmat and Iark to be more like you. Otherwise, you won't like what comes next. Not for the land, not for the orcs. As intrigued as he was horrified by Dexion's grim premonition, Ryuk merely looked at the wondrous being with a perplexed expression. Anyway, I think I've already helped you more than I should have. Take good care of Athon, will you? No, wait. What are Silmat and Iark doing wrong? Dexion took a step back, and a cloud of greenish smoke burst out in front of him, fully obscuring him. Ryuk stood up and threw himself into the cloud, but the creature was nowhere to be found, and he fell to the ground. Around him, a lush garden teeming with fruit, vines, and exotic-looking vegetation had generated, as if Dexion's presence had spurred increased vitality for the nature around him. The spirit bird swooped onto Ryuk's shoulder and nuzzled him softly, as its feathers shone brightly, reflecting the colors of the natural garden around them. Hey, Athon, right? That was your name? It's nice. Athon merely cooed for an answer. Seems like we have a quest in front of us, boy. Meanwhile, in the encampment, Iark and Silmat were holding a meeting with a few orcs of note on the subject of finding a more permanent and safer home for the orcish tribes. From outside the large tent, shouting and debate could be heard. Tricolor raised his voice, centering the focus of the debate. The way I see it, we all agree that we have to get the hell out of here, correct? Silmat and Iark nodded silently. Then we're in agreement. I don't see why we're wasting time here instead of preparing for the trip. Yark quickly replied, cutting off Silmat, who was about to begin speaking. We have very limited orc power at the moment, Tricolor, and General Silmat here would have us wasted clearing shadow enclaves instead of scouting and finding a good path to the rocky hills. Shaking his head no, Silmat explained his point of view, formally addressing Yark, but in fact trying to convince the others to side with him. Slissa, Gafar, Drakor, and Tricolor listened pensively, confronted with a hard decision. We are orcs, Yark. We can take on any terrain, even the Kier Peaks if need be. What we can't take is shadow attacks in the middle of our journey. They need to be gone before we start. No. Hitting them more will just beckon them to ravage us. They have the numbers to do so. We need to leave them alone. Restless scouting is the only way to ensure we won't run into them by accident. And just how do you know so much about their numbers, Yark? Retorted Silmat. Because my people scout and report cold, hard numbers to me. That's why I'm leading this camp while you go off on pathetic raiding adventures. Slissa stood from her chair. Will you stop fighting already? You think this is what Thytok would want? The two leaders looked down and remained silent, implicitly conceding the point to Slissa. Let's just take it to a vote, just between us. The loser must fully comply with the winner's terms of action. We can't sow division, or we'll all be dead by next week. The orcs present at the table grudgingly accepted the idea, nodding and grunting in reluctant agreement. Before the vote could come to fruition, a familiar, heroic figure stormed in the tent. She was weakened, still holding her massive wound with her right arm. But the gleam in her eyes and the glaive at her back were recognizable a mile away. The legendary Orcish queen, Thytok of Orakion, was back. Comrades, I urge you not to provoke the anger of those who did this to me, she said, pointing at her lingering injuries. We must leave this cursed place and start anew further north, as we did before. As soon as the shock left their faces, the few orcs who had taken the mantle of leadership when the queen fell stood up and properly greeted the heroine before them, taking their hands to their chests and performing a simple but personal battle shout. After proper deference, Silmat questioned the decision. My queen, I'm happy to see you on your feet again. Are you sure about not clearing the shadow nests? We have done progress tracking them, and we could... Silmat, I know your capabilities very well. It's not a matter of being able to do it, but rather a matter of whether we should do it. Well said, commented Yark. Yeah, now get the hell out of my tent, please. Most of the orcs present were happy or at least satisfied with her decision, with the exception of Silmat, who nonetheless acquiesced and helped form scouting squadrons by dismantling and reorganizing the fighting teams under his command. The days went by without much action, as the scouts did good work clearing pathways and tracing maps for our massive orcish caravan to find a new home. While most orcs took care of that, a vanguard led by Drakor and Gafar, Orakion's most proficient scouts, advanced further than everyone else, looking for a place to settle, a final destination for the journey to come. And, thanks to their skill and luck, they found such a place. A plentiful grassland, blessed with good mountainous cover almost all around, ample enough for the orcs to thrive, but small enough to easily control without too many warriors on lookout duty. It was simply ideal, though very far from Seamstone. From a vantage point in a nearby hill, Drakor and Gafar looked at the sun set behind this idyllic grassland. In a very plain, unostentatious tone, the latter asked his scouting comrade a simple question. So, Chief, how far do you think we've gone from the camp? Drakor looked at Gafar with some suspicion, taking a big puff from his leaf wrap. It wasn't like him to speak in a language other than jokes. He raised his eyebrows curiously before responding, as if he was trying to figure out what verbal jab Gafar was about to pull. Well, it's been almost 2 days for us. I believe it would take a caravan double that time, if not more. So, We're really screwed if they ambush us. Get to the point, Gafar. What are you trying to say? The scrawny scout looked away and into the horizon, where darkness was beginning to drown the sun's fading shimmer. Come on, you've seen it. All those shadows looking at us from crevices, caves, and other obscurities. Since we stopped culling their numbers, they haven't stopped spreading. They could crush us, now! Shakor joined Gafar's gaze into the dimming sun, and promptly responded. Well, at least they haven't been attacking us. Not since the Queen's back. Grabbing 2 flasks from his backpack and handing one to his comrade, Gafar replied, Here's to its staying that way, my old friend. I'll drink to that. Downing the herbaceous liquor in one large gulp, the 2 orcs sealed the drinking rite, praying the shadows would find mercy for their kin within their cursed souls. The next day, they would return to Seamstone and offer their guidance to the Queen. While the vanguard made their way back, a few wounded orcs in the camp had awakened from their injury-induced sleep, following the steps of Queen Thytok. The most noteworthy of these were Grimalock, known as Battlespear for his legendary enchanted weapon, Sul Crew, the worthy descendant of a long line of famous orc rulers, and Tirana, a mysterious fate-teller known to foresee tragic events, the one who predicted King Wykar's demise, no less. Tirana, close friend to the Queen, had been bitten by a frost spider during the journey through Kyr, and by awakening, became the first orc to survive such a wound. The frost poison had deformed half her body, turning it a different shade of green, an almost bluish tone, and her left eye, it bore the color of ice, with a gleam that betrayed a certain magic. After awakening, Tirana immediately stormed off the infirmary to find the Queen. She had seen many glimpses of the future while under the veil of slumber, and the leader of all remaining orcs needed to hear them. When the half-frosted oracle reached the Queen's tent, she found her speaking to a couple of scouts who were reporting on the progress and clearing the road ahead. So, my Queen, we've been running into some trouble with magic plants. They hit by surprise and hit hard. Those thorny vines already took 3 good orcs to the ancestors. Most preoccupying. How have you been? As Thytok replied, she turned around and noticed Tirana. Leave us, scouts. We'll resume this conversation later. In the meantime, find that idiot Ryok and tell him I sent for him. The 2 scouts nodded and left, displaying a frightful expression when sneaking past Tirana's frostbitten body. Tirana, I can scarce believe it. You made it. Thytok ran to her old friend and held her in a display of affection seldom seen from the Queen. Tirana opened her eyes wide, surprised before holding her back. A weird sensation creeped over her. Shaking it off, she pulled away from the hug, and looking in the Queen's eyes, she replied, Hey, Thy, it's good to see you. We've been through so much. We've really missed you. Oh, I know what you've been through. I've been watching from my dreams. And I have a few warnings from the future. Thytok looked down before gazing at Tirana with a melancholic smile. So quick to get down to business, you, Tirana smiled back, can't change, Queen. The 2 orcish women shared a moment of silent intimacy before resuming the conversation. So, what are these warnings you've seen, my friend? There are 2 destinies in front of our kin, Thy. I've seen an orc, enshrouded in shadows, betraying his kin and giving in to the power darkness can offer. This traitor will become our doom, if we don't become theirs first. I'm afraid the fates haven't seen it fit to show me who it was. They merely alerted me of their existence. That is a shocking prophecy, Tirana. Have my predictions failed us before, my Queen? No. Not even when my father lost his sanity after finding the primordial cannon. We'll find this traitor, together. Tirana nodded, with a confident yet concerned grin on her face. The other destiny is broken into 3 parts. When the scouting vanguard returns, you will have to make an important choice. They will give you 3 options: steppes, marshes, or hills. And what in the ancestor's name is that choice supposed to mean? Well, they are paths. You will have to choose which biome our caravan traverses to get to our new home. And what do you think I should choose, Tirana? I'm afraid there is no right choice, Thai. But I have seen the heart of darkness residing in the Rocky Hills. If we go there, I advise us to be ready for the hardest fight of our lives. But destroying it might return some balance to these lands as well. Meanwhile, the steppes will provide ample grounds for hunting, which will make the burden of acquiring food for the voyage that much easier. Finally, the marshes provide natural cover. It will be hard for anything to ambush us if we travel through there. Queen Thytok sat down and brought her hands to her head, exhausted. I'm tired of all these choices, Tira. Tirana looked down to her friend, for some strange reason unable to feel sorry for her, the way she did when she told her what her father's foolishness was going to bring forth in Orakion. The orcish seer felt detached, frigid, half dead. I'm sorry, Thytok. We all have challenges in this mortal life, as did our ancestors. I'll leave you time to think. Alone, Queen Thytok of Orakion pondered the mysterious questions before her. The return of Tirana, though welcome, had come as a shock. She tried to pray to the ancestors for guidance, but it was in vain. Ever since they crossed Kir, they seemed distant, only returning to her in short bursts of power, like the one that saved her life during the Shadow Incursion. In any case, they wouldn't be of any help right now. The hours passed, and from the inside of her tent, she heard the sound of Gaffar's voice, taunting his comrade Drakor. It was time for a difficult choice.